Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Highlights of ArcGIS Living Atlas webinar. This is part of the Esri Spatial Data webinar series, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Lisa Berry. I'm a Senior Product Engineer on the Living Atlas team, and I'm here with my teammate, Dan.
Yeah, my name's Dan Pursuit, and I am one of the content leads for Living Atlas.
All right, so this is part of a spatial data webinar series, and so this webinar will be recorded, and if you want to access any previous webinars or access the recording for this one in the future, you can access the URL that you see on screen here. Please, throughout the webinar, feel free to enter any questions into the chat, and we will try to get to them, as many as we can, at the end of the webinar today. So today we're going to be showing you some highlights of ArcGIS Living Atlas. We'll do an overview of the Living Atlas, and then we're going to cover quite a few things that you see here in this list. I won't cover every single one of them because we're about to show you. At the end, we'll show how you can contribute your information to the Living Atlas, and we'll cover some questions and resources at the end. So let's go ahead and dive in.
All right, so for those of you who are not familiar with Living Atlas of the World, this is going to be your main content repository in the ArcGIS platform. You can access Living Atlas from browsers and then different ArcGIS Pro, ArcGIS Online, different parts of the platform. The way I'd like to describe Living Atlas is in 5 different ways. One, it's authoritative. We have some of the the best, highest quality data and information products coming into Living Atlas that you can access in the platform. 2, it's curated. We have subject matter experts on staff here that review submissions into Living Atlas. They're contributed from around the world, and we go through and make sure that this is going to be the highest quality product that you can use in your mapping and your analysis. 3, it's interoperable. So the great thing is you can combine layers from different contributors and come up with novel analyses, and they are all going to work seamlessly in the ArcGIS platform. 4, it's updated. A lot of the different layers get routine updates, whether they're programmatic or they just happen on a frequency. But we're always looking to keep the content in Living Atlas, especially that authoritative information, up to date as possible. And 5, the last thing is it's growing. We have about just almost 10,000 different items in Living Atlas right now, and that's growing every year because of contributions from people like you that are in the Esri community.
And Dan, when you're talking about items, what exactly do you mean by that?
Great question, Lisa. So we have many different types of items that you can contribute to Living Atlas. One is the most fundamental would be a layer, so an individual item, a layer that you would have in a map. 2 would be a web map, so it might have multiple layers in it, right? 3 would be an app, so that could be an app that you build with one of the templates, a story map, a JavaScript API type of app.
Awesome.
You can also contribute pro packages, or we do have some in there. So and we'll get into how you can actually contribute all that different type of content later on at the end of the presentation. So what I think is really cool about Living Atlas is somebody starts working on a project and they spend weeks and months and maybe years. Maybe they do their master's thesis or their dissertation research and they publish it to Living Atlas. Well, now me as a user, I can go and I can start where there's other people have finished, right? So I get to fast forward through that entire process and incorporate their end product into my GIS analysis. So you can really start to accelerate the pace of analysis and research and just understanding the planet. And as an environmental scientist, that's what I'm really interested in doing, because some of these projects are really complex.
And so, yeah, what I like to do is when I'm explaining the Living Atlas to someone is I say the most valuable part of it, in my opinion, is the fact that it is saving so much time. All that time that you used to go to an FTP site, you used to have to go download the data, process it. You're spending so much time before you ever even get to your workflows. This new pattern is really just jump-starting everyone's GIS, is what I like to say.
Yep. So time, that's a great key. We're gonna hop into looking at some of the content that's in Living Atlas right now, and we're gonna start with one that is time enabled. Oh, that was a good transition.
I like it.
So what we're gonna start with, we're talking about our live feeds. So live feeds is just a term that we use in Living Atlas to describe the routine updated information products that are available to our users. So a lot of times we use this live feed methodology to update, weather and disaster information, things that need to be updated at a very high cadence. But you can apply live feeds to any kind of discipline or any kind of update cycle. But the nice thing is that the code for live feeds is available in ArcGIS Online, so you can actually implement these Python scripts yourself and create your own live feed of data into your platform, whether you want to share it or you're just going to use it on your own. And we actually have some really great Learn ArcGIS lessons for implementing that. So I'm going to jump into showing you a couple of the live feeds. But one thing I did want to talk about really quickly is here's some of the live feeds that we have available. We take a lot of information, a lot of weather information from NOAA, and it's contributed data from NOAA that we turn into these live feed products, and also from other groups like USGS for things like stream gauges, and NASA for some of their other Earth observation information. But you can see some of the really useful weather layers that are here. And I'd be remiss if I didn't point out one thing, that we recently updated this year all of those live feeds that were on the left-hand side of that previous slide into a new series of services. And so we want to make sure that everybody is using the most up-to-date version, not the older versions. And there's a couple really great reasons to use them. One, they no longer require subscriptions, so that means sharing different web maps and apps with them doesn't require anybody to log in. Anybody can access that. And
so that seems like it'd be really useful, especially in emergency response, natural disasters. I mean, you're not having to put a proxy on every service.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yep. Two, now we have them in a hosted ArcGIS Online environment, so they automatically scale. Sometimes we'll get, millions and millions of requests on a single day for, a hurricane forecast. Well, having that automatically scale in the cloud is really important, so you won't see any lag on the service. They update a little bit more efficiently in your displays, and they are also a little bit more flexible for using in things like apps and dashboards and things like that. So there's a lot of reasons to do the migration over to the newer versions. The older ones you won't find in Living Atlas, you will only find the new ones in Living Atlas. So I'm going to pop over to a web browser right now and give you an example of some of the live feeds. So, for example, I came up with a blog a couple weeks ago on customizing these live feeds into weather maps for winter weather. So there's a lot of flexibility and capability in these layers, and so you can really focus your maps down to a specific topic.
Did you come up with that silly phrase, "Don't get stuck out in the cold"?
I sure did.
Love it.
Yeah. So Living Atlas of the world, like I said, you can access it through the web, ArcGIS Online, Pro, different other parts of the platforms. But here's the main website at livingatlas.arcgis.com. I'm gonna go over into the browse section, which is where like the meat of the site really is. We have a lot of other information about apps and blogs, the awesome ones that Lisa and I write.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean that's
all the time.
Yeah, you definitely want to bookmark all those. But what we can see here is the ability to do a search, or we can refined. So I'm just going to pop over to Earth observations, and you can see some of these live feeds here, like weather watches and warnings and current weather stations. One of the live feeds that we have that's new this year is our sea ice. So here's an app that we built with sea ice information from NOAA, and so this gives you from 1979 to now all of the sea ice measurements in the Arctic that we can see here, and we can go all the way back and see how things are changing, or to another year, or you can interact with the graphs to display that Arctic sea ice extent. But then we also have the Antarctic, so we can swap over to the other side of the world, and we can see how that's been changing over those decades. So this is really cool. Those layers are also available in Living Atlas. So if you want to bring them into your own maps, you can do that. So sea ice extent, if I could type. There we go. We can see that we have the monthly, the median, which is kind of like the climatological average that you would use to kind of compare if it's higher or lower than normal. And we can also see the app here. So that's pretty cool stuff. I like sea ice. So we're gonna now switch over from talking about things that update automatically or in near real time to some of the other layers that we have that are getting refreshes and updates. Take it away, Lisa.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan. All right, so I'm actually going to switch us over to a completely different topic, not about the environment, but instead some data that is in the people category within the Living Atlas. So some of you may be aware that the United States Census Bureau offers what's called the American Community Survey. They do this survey in between the decennial censuses in order to get detailed information about the population. And you can see even from the census's website, this is how $675 billion in federal and state funds are distributed each year. So this data is incredibly useful. And anyone who has used this before knows that it can be a little bit of a bear to access and even just get started. So many times when people are accessing this, they have to go to this website, they have to find the thing they're looking for, then they have to download it, process it, and you're many steps away before you're ever actually making a map or learning about the data patterns. But the Living Atlas is trying to change that paradigm by offering the current year of American Community Survey directly within layers in the Living Atlas. So I searched for this phrase, current year ACS, and I got quite a few results. We actually have 78 layers within the Living Atlas that cover a really wide range of topics about the population. We offer what are the 5-year estimates, which is a conglomeration of 5 different years of this survey, which means it's the most accurate data that the census offers down to the tract level. And so these services in particular cover, like you can see, quite a few different things. We offer them as boundaries, but we also offer them as centroids. So depending on what workflow that works for you, you'll find anything that you can use in ArcGIS Online Pro. Like we said, we're going to repeat this multiple times. This is really interoperable. You can use it in many different ways. So I want to just show how some of these layers could be used. But actually, before that, I realized the most important part. We were just talking about live feeds, and one of the most important parts of these is that these layers, while they're not technically live feed services, they kind of act like that. So for those of you that have used ACS data recently, you may know that the census released their newest American Community Survey on December 19th. These layers, all 78 of them, were actually updated within 24 hours with that newest data. And so when you access these layers, you know you're always getting the newest data offered by the census. So there's no more downloading, there's no more anything. You just, when you access one of these layers, you're always getting the newest data from the census. And if you want to know what that most current 5-year estimate is, you can check the item page, or you can see which tables are being pulled from the census. One of the really cool value adds that you get when you use one of these services is that if you need one of the original field names as you see in the census pages. If you're a power user, you probably recognize this field right here, B17020_001, something that's not necessarily useful to the everyday person, but these layers actually have alias names and long descriptions for every single field that's in these services. So when you access one of these, you can learn more about what that field actually means. So you don't have to be a demographic expert in order to understand what you're mapping. So now I'm going to show you how you could find and use these. So here we are within a new layer. I say I want to add something from the Living Atlas. I'm going to look for that same exact phrase that we saw before. And if we look at the metadata, we even see that same information that we saw before. Here's the vintage and all the things we saw. So I'm going to go ahead and add this to my map. Each one of these ACS layers contains state, county, and tract. That way you can learn any different pattern you need for the same set of attributes. And unlike data downloads that you would do traditionally, where you get a blank table, you start with a GDB, you're still steps away from ever seeing any data patterns, these have pre-configured pop-ups, pre-configured symbology, and it's all very digestible, but yet also customizable. So I'm going to walk you through a really quick example of how you could utilize this to map your own area. So here we see states. If we were to zoom in, we would then see the pattern at a county level pattern. And again, we're still seeing the exact same legend, but let's go ahead and explore a city in the United States. Let's explore Detroit. So all I've done is add this into my map. It's automatically showing me the tracked pattern, but I want to customize this to show something else. I want to see what else this layer has to offer. I can go into the change style option and immediately see which attribute is being mapped, but also all these different other attributes that can be used to stratify new maps. So really this one layer contains probably easily a few hundred different maps. But in this case, I want to highlight something that's contained within these. You'll notice that these are percentage values. These are actually pre-calculated by our team at Esri so that you don't need to know exactly what the base value is for that. You don't need to be a demographic expert. You can go ahead and use some popular pre-calculated percentages right away. So for example, if I want to see what the percent of children who are living in poverty are in the Detroit area, I simply select it, my map changes, I'm learning about new patterns. But I would really like to know how that was calculated. So if I click this I, that's how you get to that long description that lives within each one of these attributes. So I could learn exactly what it means to be below the poverty level. I could learn how this is determined. And then if it's a calculated field, it'll tell me exactly what equation was used to calculate that field within this field. And then one thing I like to show people is that ArcGIS Online and Pro are really powerful ways to map data in ways that you may not have thought of before. So if we map the percent as the color to show the density, we can easily add that total count of child population in poverty and immediately start refining our map to show something interesting. We can zoom in, we can really start to get new information out of this data and start to see where patterns are emerging so that we're getting this data into the hands of the people who need it in a way that's easy to understand, but also quick for us to use. And on that topic, I actually want to transition into another part of the Living Atlas that we can find within the apps. In the apps, we'll actually see this app that's called the Esri Maps for Public Policy. And I'm going to go ahead and open this up to explore this a little bit. So if you think about it, the data from the census was designed to help our policymakers make data-driven decisions. And this application is a way to really help get that data into their hands. And you might be asking, what's a policy map? I've never heard of that.
Lisa, what's a policy map? I've never heard of that.
Wow, great question, Dan. Actually, it says it right here. Policy maps clearly show where there are opportunities to intervene. So if you think about it, if a mayor needs to make a decision, they aren't always going to have a bunch of time to understand and stratify and learn how ArcGIS Online works. And this app really is getting questions answered with valuable data quicker than ever. So if you scroll to the bottom, you can actually look through some of the pre-populated questions that you might be asking about your community. For example, how is poverty? Okay, I am also struggling. Is it Monday? It's not. But how is poverty affecting my community? So I actually saw that there's quite a few people on the phone today from Colorado. So let's go ahead and explore Denver, Colorado. We didn't have to be a GIS expert, and bam, we automatically are provided a set of 8 different maps about poverty in Denver. And I can click through these and immediately see interesting patterns within the city. I saw elderly population in poverty. I can see the child population in poverty. And if you'll notice something, these actually are driven by, many of these are driven by those ACS layers that we just saw. So ultimately, this public policy site is driven by Living Atlas content. And so you'll see a lot of things in both places because of the fact that we're using data that's coming from valuable sources, authoritative sources, in order to tell these stories. And so you can click through these to immediately learn different patterns, but if you wanted to go one step further and explore something on your own, you could easily do that by exploring these options on the side. So, for example, if I'm interested in the economic opportunity of my city, I might want to look into jobs. I see that I have that original collection of 8, but I can see other maps that might be interesting to my area. So let's go ahead and view this predominant commute time map within our city. I see a new pattern. Again, I can see this is using ACS data. And I may want to collect this into that collection of 8, and now you'll see it's a collection of 9. And so we can customize this to however we want in order to tell the story we need to tell for maybe, like I said, a constituent or some sort of policymaker. But how do we then share this exact collection that we've spent the time to put together? Actually, you can just click this copy button, and it'll create a pre-configured URL. And if I bring that into a new browser over here, it'll remember that set of 9 maps, and it'll leave me exactly where I just did. And so that way, I can share this with people who may or may not have any GIS experience, but can easily see new patterns within the data. But let's slow down a little bit. A lot of the people on this call are probably GIS experts. So if you want to go one step further and make your own map or find additional resources of how you can be creating these policy type maps, I would recommend going to this Issues tab. Within this tab, you get the full spectrum of Living Atlas driven content within the policy map site. This is coming from many different users so that you can see what other people are doing in their areas. You can again look into those categories that we saw before, but here you'll get the layers, you'll get the maps, you'll get web apps. Really, this is a full set of resources for the people who may be going off and making their own policy maps. And with that, I'm actually going to slow down again and send this back over to Dan because we have a lot more highlights to show.
All right. Well, thank you, Lisa. I'm going to now talk about, as I said before, I'm an environmental scientist, and that's really a hot topic right now. How can we create more resilient communities and drive policy with smart environmental information? And so I'm going to hop over into ArcGIS Pro and give you some updates on some of the layers that you could use to potentially drive some policy discussions in your area. So if you haven't used Living Atlas in ArcGIS Pro, I'm going to go over into my catalog pane in the portal. And of course, here's all the different content that you might have in your particular organization or in your ArcGIS Online account. We can peek around and see what Lisa has here. Mm-hmm. But I'm going to go in and I'm going to search Living Atlas right here for NLCD. You can see we have a couple things, NLCD land cover. This is the National Land Cover Database. We have impervious surface, a couple different things here. If we just drag it into our map, we get the map all ready to go. All right.
The room we're in is a little bit of a hole, it seems.
Yeah.
We do feel like we're in a cave.
So here we go. We have national land cover for the United States going from 2001 till last year. And so it's not, we don't have, 19 years of data, but every couple of years you'll be able to zoom in and see a different analysis of land cover. Let's zoom in here to the Chicago area, and we can see some change in the land cover over time. But what I think is really cool about these image services is we are trying to think about how you might want to use them. So one thing that's always interesting to do is when you work with an image service, to go look at in your menu at the processing templates. We're trying to use more and more of these processing templates to make your analysis that much quicker. So let's say that I don't care about all these different types of land classes. I just want to look at and see how urban areas have changed. So I can select this developed render. And basically, it's going to simplify the information that we have in the map to only those different types of urbanized areas. So now, if we wanted to take this, maybe put in a definition query for a particular year, we could do that. And then we could do start year is 2001.
So this data goes back to 2001. Is it every year since then?
No, it's not every year, but and different parts of the U.S. have different updates. So the conterminous U.S., the 48 lower states, they have a frequency of update that's a little bit different than Alaska, Hawaii, and Puerto Rico.
Interesting.
But there's actually some really great blogs that we have. Great, I mean, I think. Because I wrote, we have some blogs that discuss, and the item description also talks about which areas are getting updated in which years. But the nice thing you could do here is maybe copy and paste, and maybe we'll just select a different year, and then we can run some. We'll edit that definition query. We'll go to 2017. All right. And now we could run like a raster analysis between these two different layers. We can run a minus, right? And we would get the difference in the land cover for those different classifications across those two different years.
So Dan, these layers work within that analysis tool?
Yeah, they sure do.
Wow.
Yeah, so these layers are fully analytical. So it's not just pixel colors here. You have actual pixel values from the original data. So let's I'm on a year in which there wasn't. So that's NLCD. What you'll see is there's also this impervious surface. So impervious surfaces are also really important if we're thinking about environmental policy. So these are areas that water cannot drain through. So this would be concrete or some other urbanized surface type. And so you can also have access to that full time series and see how impervious surfaces are changing across the United States. And this is at 30-meter resolution, so you get some pretty detailed information for doing urban planning. It's pretty useful at that. It's based on the Landsat series of satellite data. And then we have things like tree cover, which will be updated later this year from NRCS, and croplands, which is kind of related. It's another really cool layer that it has every majority crop type for every pixel of the United States at 30-meter resolution. So you can also do some interesting mapping and see how crop patterns are changing over time.
And that's a multi-year data.
That's a multi-year data. Yep. So so that's NLCD. It's really exciting stuff that we have available. It's the first time we've had this time series available. Next, I'm going to go back over into PowerPoint. when looking at environmental policy, a lot of us are also concerned with oceans and coasts. And we worked with NOAA to develop this ecological marine units project, NOAA and USGS, I should say. So this is data coming from NOAA's World Ocean Atlas. And basically what we were able to do is take a 3D approach to clustering the ocean into distinct physical and chemical types. It's all, you know, there's a website for the ecological marine units that we have available that really discusses the full methodology. But why this is important is it gives a baseline for understanding how the ocean has been structured historically, so that if there's maybe a change in your environment, you know, in your area, you'll have a baseline to be able to detect that. I remember when I was working at NOAA during Deepwater Horizon, you know, we were having to use data like this to say, well, how is that oil spill changing that coastal and, you know, Gulf of Mexico ecosystem? Well, by using something like this, you can have that baseline to really compare how things are changing. Problem is, this is at 1/4 degree resolution. And so what we have here on the screen is an example for Monterey Bay, right? So each one of those blue dots would be, you know, one area of data, or, you know, one value of data that we have. So it's really not that useful for doing really fine local change detection. But we've been working on an EMU for the local resolution, so that you can add in your own sampling of data into this workflow, and then you can kind of come up with your local EMU as well at much higher resolution that would be more appropriate for doing some, you know, small, you know, urban area change detection. We have that as a project that you can download, a pro project. So you can go to the EMU website that you see here, and we'll be sharing these slides. You can have access to you know, these different links, and you can download the pro project, and it'll walk you through adding in your own data to do some local EMU work. All right. So I'm going to go back over some other exciting things that we've been doing in the marine environment. Also include things like coral bleaching. So again, working with NOAA to bring real-time updates of coral bleaching alerts across the world. So right now we can see 21 out of 213 stations that NOAA monitors are involved in some degree of bleaching, and we can zoom in here in this dashboard that was configured, and you can get information about each reef and its status of alert level. So again, this is just a dashboard that we built with these layers that are in Living Atlas, but like that sea ice app that you also saw, you can go into Living Atlas and pull those underlying layers, that point and poly information into your maps, into your analysis, into your own customized apps. So we encourage you to go do that, you know, for especially important topics like coral bleaching. You know, we've been, you know, of course, monitoring things, you know, in Australia and the Great Barrier Reef as they've been really impacted, but we have this for every major reef system across the world.
So Dan, are these real stations, buoys floating in the ocean?
These are virtual stations. So this is a project that NOAA developed where they take satellite data and extract it in for the values that are around a given reef. And so, but then they also have managers and people on the ground that are making comparisons to make sure that that data is actually kind of what they're seeing, you know, in the reef system. All right, so in the vein of protecting our ecosystems, we also have a new layer that's available in Living Atlas. That's the WDPA, the World Database of Protected Areas. So this is managed by the United Nations Environmental Program, UNEP, and this is the authoritative collection of all protected areas, marine and terrestrial, for the world. And this updates every month into Living Atlas, so you'll always have the most up-to-date database of protected areas. These are really detailed and you know, you can see the, you know, the detail of these polygons. So, you know, you're definitely going to want to zoom into a particular area, but now you could do some enrichment on those areas and compare, you know, what's the land cover type, you know, take the land cover that we have in Living Atlas and do some summaries on those polygons and really understand what is lying there.
So you could use these polygons alongside those other layers you showed earlier in Pro and do analysis with them?
You sure can, yeah.
Love to hear it.
Yep. All right, so one last thing that I'm going to touch on is pretty hot off the presses. You know, we've been working a lot with flood forecasting and flood modeling and flood disaster response at Esri for a long time. We've also been engaged with the group on Earth observations and the UN and the World Meteorological Organization, and all these different partners, Brigham Young University, have been working on a global stream and river forecast for the world. Well, that's available now, which is really exciting, and it's not just available as data that you can download. It's available as this map service. So this is another one of those live feeds that's updating. So every major river system for the world, we have a 6-day forecast on flood conditions for it. So this is showing it in a web map. If we want to go over here, I noticed that there's some flooding in Peru. So we can zoom in here and we can click on the area and get information about the flow in that particular segment of the river. And again, we can click through time and then see how that is going to change over the next 6 days. So this is really critical. You know, flooding is one of the largest causes of death around the world. It is the #1 killer from a meteorological standpoint. And so having a flood forecast available, especially for developing countries, is really critical. And this just makes it even easier to get to. All right, so now we're going to switch back over to Lisa, and we're going to talk about switching over from environmental cause mortality to some other health risks.
Really,
it's really chipper.
Really chipper, happy things to be talking about in the morning. So, as many of you know, the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, offer a lot of data to help us monitor the health of the United States and keep America healthy. In the Living Atlas, CDC has contributed quite a few different layers that can be used. In the past, they've given us their social vulnerability index layers. They cover a wide different range of topics, and for counties and for tracts. These have already existed, but I still think they're worth highlighting in the highlights webinar. We also have quite a few layers from them, from their Division for Heart Disease and Stroke Prevention. These are incredibly valuable layers that really help us dive into the population and see how people are doing. And what's new in our highlights is they've recently contributed these 500 cities layers that you see here with this same similar thumbnail for various different years. So we've got 2014 through 2017. And I just want to real quick explore one of these layers with you to show how important they really are. So this data has been collected by the CDC in order to look at 27 different measures of chronic disease related to unhealthy behaviors. And so this data is produced by CDC along with others and provided via this layer. And let's go ahead and just open this and see what can be done and what we can learn from a layer such as this. Immediately, we can see the pattern by the 500 different cities, and we can stratify this to various different topics in order to explore all the different cities in one map. But if we were interested in learning more about an area in particular, we could zoom in and start to see the pattern at a more localized level by census tract. And by default, this map is showing us the lack of health insurance by crude prevalence, which essentially just means the raw percentage of population that has a lack of health insurance. But just like we did with the ACS layers, we could change this map to one of the other 26 indicators and immediately start exploring and learning how our city might be doing in comparison to another city. And so I just showed you in just a few clicks how to make this map differently. And I'm going to show you a dashboard that was actually created from this exact layer that we just saw that's focusing on obesity. So I don't know about you, Dan, but a lot of times I feel like I'm drowning in data. Where do I start? Where do I begin? And sometimes it's just really important to think, how will people actually use this information? And so using something like a dashboard, like the coral reef bleaching, or this one, really gives us a sense of comparison. So if I want to see which cities are doing, have the highest rate of obesity, this app can show us this, or we can look through the top 25 cities with the highest obesity rates and start learning about how those different cities are doing. And so this is an example of something that could be created from one of these layers. So if you want to use Living Atlas content to create something like this, you can do so. And now I'd really just like to get into the question I know has been burning on all of your minds is, how do I nominate my content to Living Atlas? If you have authoritative data or some awesome dashboard, app, map, we would love to work with you to get that into Living Atlas. So if you're curious about why contributing is useful, we actually have a tab in the Living Atlas page all about the benefits of contributing to Living Atlas. And so you can explore this if you'd like to see what's in so far and what some success stories. But if you want to nominate your own content, you actually just log in and go straight to the My Contributions tab. And so here you'll get a good indication of how prepared your layer is to be nominated to the Living Atlas, because we have a level of standard of documentation and authoritativeness that will go through a curator on the Living Atlas team. So immediately it's showing me content that is eligible for the Living Atlas or possibly eligible for the Living Atlas. And you'll see here's the map that was used in that app I just showed. And it looks like there's quite a few things I would have to do in order to get this map into the Living Atlas. I'd need to improve my thumbnail, add a description, really just give information so that when someone finds an item in the Living Atlas, they know what it is, what the data is, where it's coming from, and what it really means.
So is there any like good resources for understanding how to make all those individual items, you know, stand out and really high quality?
Yes, there is, Dan, and I'm going to show that and others in just a moment.
Oh, okay. I just can't wait.
You just got so excited, I can tell.
Because I have a lot of red circles by mine.
I know. So what are people looking for? We're actually about to address that. So for example, this one, you see these red guys, these say you cannot nominate until you fix these problems. The yellows are additional things that will be looked at by the curator that needs to be done. Overall, you need to have a score of at least 80 points in order to nominate. So I've already documented that app that you just saw, but it's giving me this red thing. I have 90 points, but it's saying this must be public. I can actually edit this right here without having to go back to the item, and I could nominate this, and this will shoot off a notification to our team at the Living Atlas, and I will be in communication with the curator. But back to your question, Dan. Okay, Lisa just gave us a ton of information, clicked really fast. How am I going to remember that? Actually, we compiled this all into a story map tutorial to guide you through this process. This actually breaks it down into 3 easy steps: preparing, nominating, and finalizing. It'll tell you what we're looking for, highlight things that the curator will be mentioning if you do nominate an item, and it really just steps you through the process with some tips, tricks, and videos stepping you through the process. So this is a resource that's available.
And how can I find that?
That's also a really good question. For those of you that are either familiar or just getting started with the Living Atlas, there is now a new Learn path on the Learn ArcGIS site that has a wide collection of information about what the Living Atlas is, how to do customization of layers within your Pro analysis, your Python analysis. These are different articles, lessons, tutorials, And in this collection, you'll actually see is that story map that we just saw. So if you forget everything I just said, if you can find this Learn path by searching Living Atlas on the Learn site, you'll get quite a few different resources that will help you be successful in your everyday GIS workflows. And so I really highly recommend finding this and accessing it. And oh my gosh.
That's a lot.
That was a lot of information.
Take a breath. All right. So are you done?
I'm done.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, it looks like we have a couple questions that have come in, and if you have some additional questions, just throw them into the chat window.
All right, so I'll start with this first question. I'll give this one to you, Dan. So the question is the Living Atlas global? That's actually a great question.
Right. So Living Atlas has content from all over the world, so it's global in that respect. There is definitely global content, data that goes from 180 to 180 and 90 to 90, latitude and longitude. Some things are just regional. Some things could be one particular city or one particular country that has been nominated, and it's useful for a bunch of users, and so we accept it in. So there's all different geographies that are included in Living Atlas. Lisa, I got one here for you, and that's who provides the data for the poverty line?
Okay, so the poverty layer that I was showing before,
right.
that data is actually all coming from the census, the American Community Survey, but the poverty line is actually something that's defined by the federal government. And so it depends on how many people are in your household, how many dependents do you have. And so if you were to look at those long descriptions actually in that layer, you'd actually learn more about how that is defined by the federal government. That's a great question.
Related to federal government, we have another question. Where can we find individual state and congressional districts or maps of those different districts?
Oh, we actually, I know for a fact that we have congressional district boundaries in the Living Atlas, and they're updated with the current representatives. And if you wanted to, for example, map different types of population within each congressional district, you could actually use our enrichment tools and add one of 10,000 plus attributes for the United States to those congressional districts. So there's actually quite a lot of data that's available for congressional districts.
And you could also do something like enrich with that environmental data as well, like maybe take crops and then see in a given congressional district what's the major crop type that's grown there.
This is what I like to hear.
Lots. This is what's so cool, right? You start where others left off, and you jumpstart your GPS or your GIS. All right. It looks like we have a couple more questions.
All right, so one of the questions is, can I download layers? I would say that this is really a case-by-case situation. You can actually tell from the item page if there's an export option. You can also do export within Pro if it's available, and really I would always encourage people to start at the item page. Do you have anything to say about this?
Yeah, so in some cases, especially when we look at some of the big raster data, there might be a limit on the number of pixels that you can download from somebody's server. So, if it was a high resolution global product, you might have to restrict your area to do like copy raster in Pro or copy features or something like that. It's always probably going to work better if you're just, having that live connection, but you definitely can copy it down. It's just part of the terms of service or the terms of use that any individual defines when they contribute information to Living Atlas.
Yeah, that is a good question.
All right, so here's another one, common question. Does Living Atlas consume credits?
That is a great question. We get this quite often. The only layers within the Living Atlas that consume credits are the premium demographics layers. Those ones have a little symbol. You know what? I'm just going to go ahead and show you this because I do get this question often enough. So if we are in the Living Atlas and go to the people category, there's quite a few Esri layers that contain the most current data offered by, with it, like the ones that are in business analyst and enrichment. You'll notice that this says premium. That means that it consumes credits. This is something like 1 credit per 1,000 clicks. So keep that in mind that it's 0.001 of a credit every time you use one of these or move around the map, pan and zoom. And so really it's minimal. The only time you'd be using credits is if you were to put this within a public app or something. And this is different than some of the environmental layers that say subscriber. And in these cases, you just need to have a login to use it. Is that correct, Dan?
Correct.
So, so you can tell by these little badges whether or not something is authoritative, it's subscriber, but in general, it's only the Esri demographics that consume credits. So that is a common question we get.
Looking over some of these other questions that are coming in. How different are processing templates from the image service symbology layer? Okay. So processing templates can be used to activate a lot of different things. We use processing templates to change a variable. So for instance, we have our HICOM ocean model. You can get ocean temperature, salinity, current, speed, things like that by accessing those different processing templates. We can also kind of take and use processing templates to kind of just reconfigure a single variable that's on an image service. So changing the classes of NLCD or crops or something like that. So processing templates are really flexible. They can provide a lot more functionality to your services. So I really highly recommend checking those out, implementing themselves, but also, especially when you're working in Living Atlas to see if processing templates are available.
Do you have any blogs about that or resources in the Learn Path?
We definitely do.
Oh,
yes.
Well, so if someone wanted to explore that, they could go check out that Learn Path.
Yep.
I have one more here. How do we know if we're using the old live feed layers? Actually, is that something you can show us right now?
Perfectly queued up. All right, so let's just wait for this to open. All right, so here we go. The old live feeds were map services. These are features, so that's nice. If you are in the item description and it's one of the old ones, it will no longer say authoritative or Living Atlas. Actually, no, it will say authoritative because the data is still authoritative in nature. It will not have the Living Atlas badge there. So that's probably the easiest way. And also, you won't find them in Living Atlas anymore. They're no longer included.
And so how would I know if it was already in one of my maps? Is it in the URL for that layer or something?
Right, so you can go open up. Do you have one of your maps open here?
Oh, there's plenty of maps.
Well,
maybe just...
Yeah, so I could open this up in a map. So whenever you have any web map, you can always go into the three dots here, the ellipse, and show item details. And it'll take us back to that content description, right? And there we see that this is the real one. This has the Living Atlas badge there. So we're good. If you did that in your web map and it took you to the item description and you didn't see that, then you have the older version.
All right, and we have just a few more minutes for questions. And so one that I see right here, what levels of geography are available with the ACS layers? That's a great question. In those layers, we offer state, county, and tract, like you saw when I opened it in the map. And the reason for that, the reason they don't go down to block group is that many of the ACS tables are null at block group, and it's just the fact that this is a sample size, and so tract really is the most reliable data you can get from the census, and that's why we chose to only go down to the tract level, and so that's a great question.
All right, next question, can you search Living Atlas by country and region? And the answer, of course, is yes. One little handy dandy thing you can do is filter by region. So if you were interested in things in Belgium, you could do that, take off the environment there. And here we go. We got a bunch of content that is demographic in nature for Belgium. All right, and last question.
Yeah, we're running out of time.
As a contributor, is there a way to monitor how your map is being used? We can't do that monitoring. You can do that monitoring. You can usually do that in Portal you can get basic statistics on any layer that's shared publicly.
I think also within the organization, you can look at views and usage directly from your item page if you own an item.
Correct, yeah. I will say that, it might depend on what kind of privileges that you have, whether you have access to those stats, if you're in like a large organization and there's, admins or something like that.
All right, and we did get a handful more questions, and we apologize. We need to wrap up, but we'll try to answer those. What we would encourage you to do is actually go to GeoNet and reach out to us. That's a great way to communicate with our contributors. And I'm going to leave this up on the screen for just a minute so you can write down that URL. We just handed you so many links, so many pieces of information. We showed you so many cool things. And if you access this URL at the top, esriurl.com/livingatlas-highlights, you'll actually get directly to this page. And all of these are live links that you can follow. And down the line, you will be getting the recording plus the slides, I believe. And that way, if you have things that you wanted to click or explore within the PowerPoint, you can also do that. And so we really do encourage you to write down this URL, and we will share as much resources with you as possible. Dan and I both, as we've mentioned a few times, write blogs quite often, so we encourage you to use the blogs. You can also follow us both on Twitter. I would say I use Twitter 99% just to say, look at this really cool new thing.
And cat pics.
And cat pictures.
Yeah.
No. My cat has his own Instagram.
Right.
But yeah, so if you want to follow us, I really highly encourage it. I would say it's some good quality content. And so if you want to kind of keep up with us in a more social aspect, you can always reach out to us via Twitter if you want to contact us. But we also do encourage you to engage with us via the Living Atlas Twitter, the ArcGIS blogs. There's a whole Living Atlas section, category of the blogs, and to reach out to us on GeoNet, because that's a really good way to ask your questions, see if someone else has had that same question, and it really just creates that link with you and the Living Atlas team. Coming up, there's quite a few different things. Fed GIS is just around the corner in DC.
I'll be there, say hi.
Oh my gosh, you're gonna be there?
Oh yeah, I'm gonna freeze.
It's probably gonna be freezing.
Yep.
And on the flip side, Dev Summit is in March in Palm Springs, where it will be absolutely gorgeous. So we also encourage you to go to that. And AAG is also coming up in April, and Esri will be there as well.
And we'll be available at all these different events to take your questions if you have them.
Yeah, Esri, Living Atlas, you can always, that's a great point, always just find us there.
Great. All right, well, I think that's it for today. We would like to thank you for joining us. Keep sending in questions through GeoNet, and happy mapping.
Happy mapping, have a great day.